piece of wood.
This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. You were just listening to Amy Martin. Amy Martin joined us yesterday in the studios of Missoula, Montana. I'm Amy Goodman here in Bozeman, Montana, as we continue our Community Voices community media tour around the country. Tonight we'll be in Boise, Idaho. We'll be broadcasting from there on Friday, and then we head to Los Angeles. We'll be there for several days. We'll be heading then to Phoenix and to Tucson, to Lawton, Oklahoma. We'll also be broadcasting from there. And then we will head on to College Station, Texas. We'll be broadcasting as well from Austin, Texas, and then we'll move on to Madison, Wisconsin for the 100th anniversary of the Progressive Magazine. Just before that, we will be in St. Louis, finally in Denver at the Green Festival on May 2nd. Then back in New York on Sunday, May 3rd, it will be Pete Seeger's 90th birthday. There'll be a massive event for him and concert at Madison Square Garden. Well, I'm Amy Goodman here in Bozeman. Juan Gonzalez is in New York, and our guests here are joining us in Bozeman. Montana is grizzly bear territory. When Lewis and Clark came through the area in the early 19th century, there were at least 100,000 grizzlies in this country. Today, the grizzly population is just a fraction of that. Reports indicate hunters are killing grizzlies in record numbers around Yellowstone National Park as they move into new places searching for food. Scientists suggest climate change could threaten the bear's main source of food. Whitebark pine trees because of beetle infestations that are growing worse as winter temperatures get warmer. Yellowstone's 600 grizzlies were taken off the endangered species list in 2007, but if their death rate remains high, they might be back on that list. Today we're joined by two guests who've worked for years to chronicle and protect the grizzly. Doug Peacock is a longtime naturalist, adventurer, and writer. His books include Grizzly Years, In Search of the American Wilderness. He was a close friend of the late writer Edward Abbey. One of Abbey's most famous characters, Hayduke, from his book The Monkey Wrench Gang, was based partly on Doug Peacock. Doug Peacock was awarded a Guggenheim Fellowship in Nonfiction for 2007 for his environmental writing. Doug's wife, Andrea Peacock, is also here in the Bozeman studio. She's covered Western environmental news for several years, writing for Mother Jones, Counterpunch, and other publications. Together, Doug and Andrea Peacock have co-authored the book The Essential Grizzly, The Mingled Fates of Men and Bears. We also had Andrea in studio yesterday when she traveled 4 hours to join us in Missoula to talk about the city in Montana called Libby, the historic trial that's taking place in Missoula. We want to welcome you both to Democracy Now! Grizzly bears. Doug, why are grizzlies so important to you?
Well, it's the one animal on this continent that really challenges human beings for that top slot on the food pyramid. You know, they challenge our dominion, they challenge our control, and I think that's a really healthy relationship because we modern humans somehow think we live apart from those natural systems we evolved from. And with the grizzly bear out there, you know, you have to take that animal quite seriously because on occasion it does kill people. And, you know, we've lived with that condition since our genesis in Africa. And you know, these few last enclaves, these little remnants of that habitat, we call wilderness, and they still have the grizzly.
Andrea, how did you get interested?
Well, I met Doug, and grizzlies were a pretty big part of his life, but we decided to work on this book together, and he's the sort of guy who doesn't let a couple of facts get in the way of a good story, whereas I'm more of a journalist, so our strengths worked pretty well together.
What do you mean by the mingled fates of men and bears?
Mingled because I've believed, not quite glibly, and I've written about this through the course of 4 books, that our fates really are the same. You know, the grizzly bear is an omnivore who lives in the same habitats humans lived in, you know, right up until we had cities. And in North America, that's always been the case. The grizzly bear came over at the same time as humans to this continent, some 50, 30,000 years ago. We don't know exactly when. Bears and humans came down from Alaska into the country, and a lot of animals died out during the last global warming of 14,000 years ago. Humans and grizzly were the two big critters, the two big omnivores that survived, and I really do believe we do have a common fate, and it's not because we can't live without grizzlies. I think that we lose an essential part of our soul, that part that's going to perhaps help us survive the terrible threats to today, and especially global warming.
Doug Peacock, I'd like to ask you, you were a Vietnam veteran, a medic in Vietnam, and could you talk somewhat about the experience returning from the war and then deciding to spend so much of your life in pursuit and understanding of grizzlies?
Yeah, I was a Green Beret medic in Vietnam, and I was there 2 tours of the Green Beret through the Tet Offensive. The Tet Offensive, Tet Offensive really seared my soul. I had to deal with 180 civilian casualties, all women and children, as the only medic. So when I came back to this country, I was like a lot of other vets. I was really out of sorts. And so I crawled back into the one place I've always called home, and that's the wilderness of the American West. Eventually, I lived and camped in the Northern Rockies, eventually in Yellowstone. There I ran into grizzlies. You cannot, self-indulgence is utterly impossible in grizzly country, and that's exactly what I need. And so in a way, these bears saved my life. They allowed me to recapture the elements of my own humanity, and for the last 40 years, I've been doing the best I can to pay them back.
Well, and the character Hayduke in Ed Abbey's book Monkey Wrench Gang was based a lot on your character.
Hayduke, yes.
Hayduke, I'm sorry. Could you tell us, for those who haven't read the book, what is monkey wrenching?
Monkey wrenching is it's like homeland defense, and home really is our wilderness, our wild nature. And in order to fight that battle, sometimes you have to take on bulldozers, the logging, mining industry, and a lot of Ed Abbey's monkey wrenching had to do with the destruction of industrial equipment. That is not terrorism. Ed Abbey never believed in violence to any living thing. And it is the old Sabbat from England that he picked that model.
Explain who Ed Abbey is.
Edward Abbey was a writer, a considerable writer. He died 20 years ago. I buried him myself. And
in Arizona in the desert?
Somewhere out there, yeah.
Illegally?
According to his last wishes, in a beautiful illegal grave. And but anyway, he wrote a book called Desert Solitaire, and then also The Monkey Wrench Gang, and about 20 other books too. But that book changed people's lives. Desert Solitaire was, it was our first militant conservation book about the West. It's not just enough to go out and lobby and protest, but literally, this is a war against our homeland, the wilderness. And Edward Abbey, more than I think any, on a foundation of people like John Muir and Aldo Leopold, he really, the militant part of the, Western conservation movement, I believe, started with old Ed.
I wanted to turn to a clip of Edward Abbey in his own words. This is from the documentary Edward Abbey, A Voice in the Wilderness. Here he talks about why humans need the wilderness.
We need wilderness because we are wild animals. Every man needs a place where he can go crazy in peace. Every Boy Scout troop deserves a forest to get lost, miserable, and starving in. Even the maddest murderer of the sweetest wife should get a chance for a run to the sanctuary of the hills, if only for the sport of it. for the terror